back on the Double Digits podcast. I'm your host, Imad.
I'm your host, Omer, and today we have our two guests, Batul and Amina.
Assalamualaikum.
Oh. That's fine. That works. Walaikum assalam. Peace be with you, and peace be with you as well. So today we have, for the first time, two female guests on the podcast. These are the first two girls, women, whatever. On this
Hashtag feminism.
Hashtag feminism. We are all about that. So today we wanted to talk about teenagers and mental health, and that's a topic that comes up a lot, right? Mm-hmm. But we as teenagers don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. We as youngins, we don't talk much about it. We have our professors or our psychologists or our therapists or our teachers or our parents telling us how mental health works in us. However, they've surpassed that stage of their life, mm-hmm, right? And it's different for them now than it is for us. So I just kind of want to get to know, what are you guys' thoughts on mental health in teenagers nowadays?
You want to start?
You can start.
Okay, here we go.
So, just to give a little bit of context, me personally, I suffer from multiple mental illnesses, and I've throughout my life, my sister has autism, so I've been in contact with therapists, psychologists, psychotherapists, just neurologists, learning about mental health, and I'm not necessarily an expert, but I'm a lot more well versed than most of the teenagers my age because of my experience. Yeah. So that's just I want to set the stage with that first of all. Second of all, before anything. If you or anyone you know is in danger of harming themselves or others, you have to call 911. You have to. And whatever we talk about here on the podcast, you cannot take that as, now I have ADHD because of what they said. You cannot self-diagnose and even under extreme circumstances. Okay.
Before you continue, we just want to say a trigger warning in case stuff something comes out of hand. If you are not comfortable talking about mental illness in any way, please stop listening now. But this is going to be the topic that we're going to be going through with. So please continue.
Yeah. And again, if you can't call 911 for whatever reason, you can call the distress center if you're in Toronto, 416-408-HELP. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now that we've set the stage with all the disclaimers and everything, so mental health in teenagers is often something that people look over because teenage angst is something that's it's not real. It's just, you're going to surpass that phase. It's going to just happen. You're going to get over with it. But it's a lot of times, the reason that we see suicide so high and self-harm so high in teenagers is because we're not addressing that angst. We're not looking at, okay, what's causing it and how can we resolve it? And one of the things that I really struggled with in my own mental health journey was finding people who I could trust, who were willing to help me. And not only that, but also identifying that my friends are part of the problem. Because for them, mental health, again, isn't something that they view as real, as legitimate, as something that they should take into consideration. So it's an interesting conversation, to say the least. And it's also something that I think we need to start as teenagers, because if we don't talk about it, no one's going to talk about it.
Alright, that makes sense. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of mental health inside of a teenager and how,
I just think that some people, generally, people think that it's there's something wrong with your faith, you're not concentrated in your salah stuff, or you're skipping salah, and that's the problem of your mental illness. But it's not. It's an actual thing. It's not just It's an actual problem that people aren't taking, not dealing with properly. They're not addressing it properly. So I think there should be more seminars and more conferences that directly are towards teenagers to help them with this kind of problem.
Well, as Batul just said, the whole gist of you're saying that your friends don't really support mental illness and mental awareness. Not really support, but understand mental awareness and stuff. And I just want to get your opinion on how you think of your peers and the people who surround you don't really have understand what mental awareness is and how that's affecting you.
Okay. So it's one of the things that I often tell my friends or people around me, my peers, is illnesses are not adjectives. So when we say, oh my God, the weather is so bipolar, or I'm so OCD because I always have to underline my titles, no, That's not how it works. The weather does not have mental illness, and having to be neat or organized does not make you have OCD. Getting distracted once in a while does not give you ADHD. Like being moody does not mean you have personality disorder. I think identifying that teenagers often exaggerate these illnesses to a point where me, as someone who actually has those I actually do have a personality disorder, it makes me feel like, hey, so my illness isn't legitimate. So if I had cancer or a broken leg or multiple sclerosis or whatever, that would be taken seriously. That's like, okay. I have PCOS, for example. And when I told my friends that, I remember a couple of my friends actually came and cried to me because like, oh, it interferes with certain aspects of my life. And like, oh my God, how do you deal with that? But I told my friends I had mental illness for a good 2-3 weeks. Some people didn't even say a word to me. So I think that the problem is more of they don't understand what mental illness means. And to them, it's just a means of exaggeration or expressing general emotions. So I think that's something that I really wish teenagers my age would work on. One, and two, when I told my story, part of my story to the school, and afterward, and I mentioned at the end, I said I don't want anyone to treat me differently. What I'm looking for is for you guys to view mental health differently.
Yeah. So you talked about how we teenagers we make fun of it.
Yeah.
We make jokes and it's not. It's not unique to just your group of friends. It's most kids nowadays have just these jokes, and especially with our culture nowadays with social media and stuff, it's really easy to make these kind of jokes. But when someone says oh, I'm so depressed when they mess up on a test, for example, right? Depression is the idea of
perpetual sadness.
Perpetual sadness. It's this chasm that you can't get out of, right? And then when someone says, oh, and sometimes it could hurt somebody, obviously. Do you think that this kind of desensitization of these words is because of us, or is it because of some other outwardly source? Why would we start making fun of this? Because some people have that defense mechanism when they have this mental illness, is when they joke about it, because they're like, oh, it's fine, it's okay, I'm just gonna joke about it and it's gonna go away, right? And obviously that's not the right way to do it, but no one's gonna say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Whatever way you cope with it is fine. What I'm trying to point out is the reason that we make fun of the mental illness is because we aren't sensitized to it, or is it because people have been telling us that it doesn't exist?
I think that there are multiple factors. So desensitization and just the way we feel mental illness and how we joke about it, how we joke to avoid uncomfortable situations. I think that they both contribute. I think Amina can also agree to this. When I first was coming to last year when everything first happened, and even this year when I decided about telling my story, I was very, very scared that after people go around being like, oh, I'm depressed because Batul said this. Or I have anxiety because, look, Batul said that and then I have anxiety too now. So it's, I think it's more of people don't want to or haven't understood that they need to take these illnesses seriously. One, so that's the desensitization part. And also because people who do have mental illness, for example, me, in the beginning, when I used to joke about it too. Back 2-3 years ago when I first, realized I have mental health issues, I used to joke about it all the time. And then it wasn't until, I talked to people with mental illness and realized that, okay, I have to accept that I want to have this illness. And two, that it's not a joke. If someone breaks their leg, it's not a joke, right? Would you guys, you wouldn't be like, oh my God, you broke your leg, ha ha ha, or I broke my leg too because I ran outside,
I might say if they're into the theater, I'd be like, hey, break a leg.
But that's different. That's an actual saying. Whereas anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, autism, Asperger's, these are not adjectives. So when teenagers use them, it could be out of, them being uncomfortable with the idea these are real illnesses. And also I think when alhamdulillah, I've successfully convinced 2 people so far to not use illnesses as adjectives. And
somewhere. It's a positive.
And so one of these one of these. Oh, sorry. Okay, one of these people actually, you know, when I first I remember I was almost on the verge of tears, and I was telling them like, stop saying that you're depressed when you're not. Anyway, so and they started noticing. All of our friends say, "Oh my God, math makes me want to kill myself," and you know she noticed that, and then she actually came back to me and she was like, "Batul, my God, I never realized how much we use all these horrible things, these illnesses, these conditions as everyday adjectives." And the problem with that, and I know I'm rambling here, I'm gonna cut it short soon, but the problem with using them as adjectives is when someone actually has the illness or is actually going through something, they're not taken seriously, or they feel that, I personally felt for sure that if I brought it up, no one would take me seriously. I think Amina can also kind of attest to this when I was first talking to her.
Yeah, so I feel like people just kind of, like a lot of people think it's a joke just because it's mental illness. You can't really physically see it most of the time. So people also don't want to admit to it because then people start judging you and they have all these misconceptions about you. And I think that's a really big problem because then people with actual mental illnesses will feel uncomfortable with people that will judge them, who will be biased about certain ideas that they have about mental illness. So, yeah.
I don't know. It's a difficult topic to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's people who don't want to hear about it, people who will not hear about it, people who just they just don't care. Right? The whole act of saying, "Oh, I'm gonna kill myself for this," and exaggerating these kind of sentences, I don't agree with it either. But it happens, especially in our friends group.
Yeah,
exactly. We have people who will say that on a daily basis. "Oh, kill me," or "I'm gonna die," or "There's no point in living," and it gets to a point where it's like, are you joking now, or are you actually being serious?
Because people in the friend circle could actually be suffering from mental illness, and joking about that could kind of trigger.
Yeah, and you never know that kind of stuff, and so it's different when you're talking about it with people of the same age group, because we're all around the same age, but when you are told about it by an adult, right? When you're told about it by someone who is older than you, or you're supposed to respect because they're older than you, or something like that, it makes you think like, oh, they don't know, like that's not real, that kind of thing. I think the worst thing about people, not the people of mental health, the worst thing about mental health is when someone has it, it's really difficult to approach people about it, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't. And people you're really close to sometimes be like, why didn't you come to me? And it's like, it's not because I didn't want to come to you, it's because it's just I couldn't do it. Like something stopped me. Like physically, like I could not come to myself to telling you about it, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what would you guys say to somebody who might be dealing with this kind of problem, who doesn't feel like they can go to anybody, who feels like they're all by themselves, and sometimes saying, oh, there is somebody who won't help?
So I'll give a real life example here. So I actually had a friend who one day we were just texting, and all of a sudden they informed me that they're in crisis. They had collected about a certain number of pills, and they were going to kill themselves. That was their plan. And I remember being in that situation. This was probably the first time it ever happened to me. No, second time, right? It wasn't Amina.
It wasn't Amina. Confirmation that it was the second time.
Yeah, because I've told Amina the story over the years. Right. over the months.
Y'all are like 17, 16. How long have you been friends?
Anyways, so this person was in crisis, and I remember I had to stay on the phone with them till about 4 a.m. just to talk them out of this. And I remember being in that situation is really, really difficult. But one of the things that, after this all happened, and what I found really important was this person had honestly felt like they had nobody to talk to. And the only reason they'd actually approached me in the first place was because I had point blank asked them, hey, are you going to kill yourself? Because they had been making jokes, like what Iman mentioned earlier, like, oh, math thinks of this, whatever. Yeah. And I remember one day I was like, are you going to kill yourself? And we had gone pretty close at this point. That person was like, I remember I was on the phone. Oh my God, just memories. Ugh, okay. So
Take your time.
they said, yeah. And I was like, you're joking. And they're like, no, I'm not. And they started crying. And I remember just in that moment, when someone's life depends on your words, you think before you talk,
Yeah, it's difficult.
And it's very, very difficult. And, alhamdulillah, I keep saying over the years because it's been a couple of years, there have been multiple times where people have approached me in crisis. And I'm not equipped to handle it. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not anything like that. But the point of when people approach you, that kind of stuff, it's one, a very tense situation. Two, you learn that there are certain things, even as someone who I think of myself as a little more educated in mental health than some the people around me.
Yeah.
Even in that situation, you cannot rely on yourself to be the professional. And I think one of the things that I always tell my friends is call Kids Help Phone. Kids Help Phone is.
Is he out there?
No, he's not in right now.
No.
Okay.
It's fine. We'll cut that. Just keep on.
Okay, so one of the things I'll give you an example. So one of my friends approached me and told me they were being abused at home. And when they approached me with that, I remember being like, okay, I can't handle this. I went to one of the teachers and I was like, hey, I didn't say the person's name. I was like, oh, a certain person came and told me they're being abused at home. What should I do? And can you call CAS on their behalf? CAS is Children's Aid Services, or can you do? And they're like, no, I can't because they haven't told me. And so I ended up making that person call Kids Help Phone.
Okay.
And I remember, and that is maybe not for everyone, but it's definitely something that's for I would say 85% of people.
All right.
So I want to get into like you said before about how people use adjectives to kind of describe mental illness, but they're not really facing it, they're just joking around about it. I want to get into why you think people start just using mental illness as a joke.
I think I can attest to this as well, is because I think it goes back to what we were talking before, is people have a very tough time understanding that these are real illnesses, right? Like, if I told you guys that, oh my God, I just ran through the hallway and I feel like I have cancer in my leg, I feel like I have a tumor in my leg.
Mm-hmm.
Will you guys be disgusted?
Yeah,
what are you saying? Cancer is not a joke.
Yeah.
But if I said, oh my God, running the hallway, I feel like I'm having a panic attack. Oh my God, my anxiety in my heart is what? That you guys be completely okay. I'm not saying you guys. I mean, people would be pretty okay with that, right? So it's the fact that we don't have a sort of reverence or respect for the fact that these illnesses kill people. Suicide is what kills people, what kills teenagers the most, right? Mm-hmm. Think thousands of teenagers every single year die because we as a society can't facilitate an environment where they feel comfortable telling people about what they're going through, right? Yeah. So I think that when people joke about it, it's because they don't realize the effects of mental illness.
Well, I also see that on social media and stuff, and I don't want to discredit anybody who actually has mental illness, but there's some there's social media figures that I don't want to use the word extra, but be extra with a mental illness. They might not even have mental illness and say I'm depressed. Use it as to just tell their fans and get more views and stuff. Yeah. And I think that's why we become desensitized and then we joke about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that raises a good point. I don't know what are your thoughts about that kind of desensitization?
I mean, I want to go back to the question of how you would comfort a friend.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I mean, I haven't experienced this kind of situation where you had to help someone through and convince them not to self-harm themselves, or I think you really, really have to comfort them. You have to be very careful with what you're saying.
Don't blame them.
Yeah, because at that point they're in a very vulnerable state where anything can hurt them. Yeah. Any word, any little phrase you could say could just ruin everything, and they could possibly harm themselves really badly. Mm-hmm. So you should never blame them. You should never be oh, why would you do such a thing? Why would you think that? Mm-hmm. And just really try to think in their shoes, how they're going through this. And yeah.
And again, I keep stressing this because it is an issue. if you're not professional, you have to direct people to the professionals, right? You have to, like every time anyone has ever approached you and they told me about a certain crisis moment or because of a mental illness or a symptom, whatever, abuse, I always point them back to Kids Helpful or the Distress Center every single time, because that end of the day, us as teenagers, we are not prepared. We're not educated. We're not prepared to handle these situations, right? So, it is difficult, but you have to keep turning back to the professionals because they're the ones who are meant to handle it. And by the way, just want to point this out, if you're 16 and over, you have the right to tell your doctor, and any doctor, by the way, including your dentist, that anything, and have the right to confidentiality. So your parents don't need to know. And if you're having a tough time with, like, okay, my parents might find out and they're not open to mental health, Kids Health Fund, again, like I mentioned before, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Sunday through Wednesday. There's an online thing that you can do in incognito in Google Chrome, where you can actually talk to a professional counselor and your parents won't find out. Or, a lot of schools, and you can use a school phone. A lot of schools allow teenagers to use the school phone privately to call Kids Help Phone. You can even, like, once, even, like, if you don't want, I know, for example, I didn't want Kids Help Phone number on my phone plan. So I remember, like, I actually had to ask, I think I asked a mayor a couple times for his phone. So I could call
Kids Help Phone with my phone? Okay, whatever.
Like, it's just like, but I'm just telling, I'm trying to give you guys, whoever's listening, examples of working around your situation to find that professional help. Right? Like, I don't think Mary ever got mad at me for that,
I don't know, you did it. But it
Yeah.
What looks like is the leading cause is the diagnosis of finding out what your mental illness is.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what you gotta start.
You gotta find out. You
Yeah.
can't just, like,
There's also this whole idea that a mental illness stems from a drastic or a tragic event.
Yeah.
Once that happens, that's
yeah.
if you haven't had
very
that in your
common.
life, you're not mentally ill.
Yeah.
But that's not true,
Yeah.
because things can build up really easily.
Yeah.
This is more prominent in I think guys than girls, just because like statistics and stuff is that guys don't talk. They don't share their feelings.
Yeah.
They don't stuff like I can't remember the last time I think I cried about something. Like actually tears falling down, and that's not like obviously it's not like you have to be doing that kind of stuff, but emotion is just something you should probably let out, and it doesn't have to be towards your friends or like stuff like that. You could do it towards family members, people you're close to, as long as you kind of get that emotion out there as useful. But the whole idea that mental health illness stems from something drastic or something intense,
It's
something
completely
huge,
wrong.
isn't true. Obviously it can happen.
Yeah.
Obviously
Yeah.
there's a huge, it can be, you can gain a mental illness from a tragic event, but
not the
there
only
are
way.
times where maybe you've a couple of years have built up and something's happened, and now you just seem kind of sad or down in the dumps, and that's not a problem, right? You kind of at a moment where you kind of feel as though you're weak or you're sad or even sometimes you might just not feel like you're feeling anything, which is a feeling, by the way. That's the moment where you go, all right, maybe there might be something, and it's always better safe than sorry, right? You don't just go, oh, it's probably nothing. I'll walk away from it. You tell someone, and you tell someone anonymously. You tell someone who you're close to, whatever it is. You tell them, and then maybe that could like set you on a path where you're like, all right, maybe I do have something, and I should probably get it checked out, or I don't have something, and I can maybe this is a rut for me, and I can probably get out of this rut, right? That's kind of the thing. And I wanna move this conversation a bit towards religion. So we're Muslims.
Yeah.
We follow the religion of Islam, which is which is known as the religion of peace. And when people say peace, people think peace of between peoples. We have to be peaceful towards everybody. There's also peace of mind.
Yeah.
And that's something I think a lot of people have forgotten, especially those of us those Muslims who are a lot older than us. I'm not talking about the ones right above us. I'm talking about like the older than that.
Like elderly.
Yeah,
people.
yeah. They believe that mental illness isn't real, but there is, and I'm not a scholar and I'm not gonna say anything about the Quran or anything like that. I'm just gonna say, in my opinion, Islam preaches or teaches that mental illness is real and it's a thing, and you should be finding peace within yourself, right? Because Islam means peace both outwardly and inwardly. So what do you guys take on that? Kind of the idea behind Muslims having this kind of stigma towards mental illness that people who aren't following Islam have, or the idea that some Muslims just don't believe mental illness exists. They think it's just a thing us kids have made to kind of fight back against the religion, to rebel and that kind of thing.
I actually don't understand why people would make that up. Like, oh, Muslims, like within the Muslim community, we don't have mental illness; it doesn't exist or anything.
Yeah.
Like, mental illness isn't just for a certain kind of people. It can happen to anyone. It can be within everyone. So there's no like specific religion or race or any kind specific person that will get a mental illness, and it's kind of sad how the Muslim community doesn't really address it as important as it is. Like they don't do very much to, especially to target teenagers, because they assume you're an adult, you have to like help yourself. You can't like go and ask anyone else for help. But you really, when you're in a crisis, you really need to ask people for help.
I want to ask the question again. Why? Like, why do you think elderly people are like that?
I think for them growing up, it was very much like, like power through it. Whatever you're going through, but like, okay, if you feel sad, whatever, power through it. Like whatever. Like so I actually know an elderly lady who's dyslexic, and for a majority of her life, people kept telling her, "Oh, you're just being lazy. You're not doing the work. You're this that the other." And then finally, when I think she was 68, she was diagnosed with dyslexia, and it was for her like her whole life she'd been suffering, but she'd been told, and she had come to believe that it was just her being lazy. So I think for a lot of the older generations, for them growing up, it was like, emotions are bullshit, whatever, and it's.
We don't have to bleep that again.
It's they're just like, you just power through, be tough, be strong, be a rock. If you're a girl, go cry and then come back. And I actually want to bring back the conversation to the religion for just a minute. So it's actually a hadith by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It says Sahih Bukhari, book 75, hadith number 2. I know my sources. So the hadith is, no fatigue, nor disease, nor sorrow, nor sadness, nor hurt, nor distress befalls a Muslim, even a prick from a thorn, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives his sins for it. And I did research in the background of this hadith when I first saw it, so I was like, whoa, mental illness, Islam, whoa. So, I went back, asked Sheikh Yusuf, the Sheikh at Nugget Masjid, and asked him, what's the background? He's like, this hadith has actually, scholars have taken it to, it refers to mental illness. It refers to, like, when, the word that they use for distress is actually the Arabic word for anxiety. So it's like, we often think that, oh, Islam is something to mental illness, but no, Rasulullah suffered a whole year of sorrow, right?
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of, like, even like, for example, Julaybib. So a lot of scholars have actually thought that Julaybib may have had some sort of mental incapacity or something, where this is why people didn't appreciate him or whatever to the extent that they should have, and Rasulullah treated him with the same respect and love, and maybe even more so than the other people, right? So there are rather references in Islam to mental illness in a positive light, in this way where you're supposed to approach it as a real illness, like the prick of the thorn and a disease is mentioned in the same hadith as anxiety and depression. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah acknowledge them as diseases, acknowledge them as real things, then why don't we as Muslims, right? So, Amina, you want to add anything to that?
Not really, but just going back to how people kind of joke around with it, I think with like close friends and everything, and once people actually get to know that they have an actual mental illness, like they've gone to specialists and everything, and they kind of want to talk to someone about it that's not like a professional, like a close friend or something, they might have like joked about it before, but once they actually know, they realize the importance of it, and they'll tell a close friend. And if they've joked about it before, like how Batul was saying in her story, how the person kind of joked around about that mental illness, but then it actually occurred to them, then like the close friend won't really understand. They'll just kind of be like, "Are you joking? Like,
Yeah.
is this an actual
Yeah.
thing?" Like, they might not take it seriously the first time. Like, I think most stories that I've heard of when someone tells them that they're feeling suicidal or they're gonna attempt self-harm or something, they don't really, they think it's a joke at first. There's like, "Oh, are you kidding? Like it's not, you're not actually thinking of that, right?" And
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I know
then
what you mean.
that person kind of feels like, "Oh, not maybe I'm not thinking straight. Maybe I should just not talk about it and just keep it like on the down low and no one like knows about it." So I don't think people with mental illness should think that way. Like people would just keep putting them down or just kind of ignoring their problem. I think people should like take it more seriously and have just more
You should care
like
about it
education.
more.
There
Yeah,
should
I
be
know
like
what you
more
mean.
educational
They should be taught about it more.
Yeah, it should be
okay.
taught more.
Well, with that, we'd like to thank you guys for coming on. Right before we finish, though, we do want to say that once again, we're not professionals. This is just a couple friends having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. If you do think that you might be suffering from a mental illness, please contact a professional, like what was said many a time. Thank you guys so much for coming. This has been a topic that will be very difficult to talk about even in the future, and it has been difficult to talk about now.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. We've gone over our limit, which is 30 minutes. So thank you guys so much. Batul and Amina, they were here. Imad, my co-host.
Hello.
Awesome. And this
Hi
is
again.
the Double Digit Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to hear you guys next week.